Close your eyes. Let the weight of the day loosen its grip. The air grows still. Somewhere beyond your window, the world settles into quiet shapes of dusk. The last echo of light fades behind distant rooftops, and the soft rhythm of your breathing becomes the only sound that matters. Now imagine yourself stepping backward through time, past the hum of cities, past the age of iron and glass, past the noise of invention and reason. The world grows dimmer, older, slower. You find yourself standing at the edge of the Middle Ages, a landscape bathed in candlelight and shadow. The wind smells of wood smoke and rain. Church bells drift through the mist. Somewhere, a monk is whispering prayers in Latin, his voice low and steady like a heartbeat in the dark. This was an age before certainty, when faith and superstition guided every trembling decision. Medicine was poetry wrapped in ritual, and the human body was a mystery no one truly understood. The glow of firelight painted small halos on stone walls, and in the silence between prayers, people listened for the sound of God within their own heart. We move softly through this world of shadowed corridors and cold breath, where life and death were separated by the thinnest veil of belief. The night is long, the air gentle, and every flicker of light feels sacred. You are safe here, watching from the stillness as the candle of history begins to burn. The four humours, the balance of the body. In the long, slow rhythm of medieval life, people believed the human body was a small reflection of the universe, a vessel built for balance. Inside this fragile vessel flowed four sacred elements: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They were not simply fluids, but forces, temperaments, and moods. Each belonged to one of the elements of nature: air, water, fire, and earth. And together they formed the invisible harmony that kept the soul at peace within its shell of flesh. To be healthy was to be balanced. To be ill was to be unbalanced, as if a storm had passed through the body and unsettled its inner weather. Too much blood could bring fever and restlessness. Too little made one pale, slow, and sorrowful. Phlegm, cool and moist, ruled calmness and quiet thought, but when it gathered too thickly, it made the mind heavy and the body sluggish. Yellow bile carried the fire of energy and anger. When abundant, it burned through reason. Black bile belonged to earth, dense and dry. The element of melancholy, a sadness that could deepen until it darkened the soul. Every human life was seen as a delicate negotiation among these four spirits. A good physician was not a scientist, but a mediator between the body and the heavens. He read signs in every surface: the tint of the skin, the warmth of the hands, the taste of the tongue. He examined the color of urine, the rhythm of breathing, the way a person spoke in sleep. Each detail, no matter how small, was a message from within. There were no microscopes, no knowledge of cells or germs. The body was a mystery, and the mystery was sacred. The physician's chamber was half study, half chapel. He spoke softly, almost reverently, as if the patient's illness were a confession whispered to him by nature itself. In this world, medicine was an act of faith. A doctor might recommend rest, a cool drink of herbs, or a cut to release bad blood. He might light candles and murmur prayers while placing his fingers upon a wrist, listening not for a heartbeat, but for harmony. If he felt chaos beneath the skin, he would write in his ledgers that the humours had fallen into discord. Every cure began with ritual: a bowl, a cloth, a quiet room, and the hope that the patient's body would listen to reason. Sometimes it did, sometimes it did not. But the purpose was never control. It was restoration, the slow return of calm to the storm. For centuries, this belief shaped every healing hand in Europe. It painted medicine with mystery and gave illness a soul. And though the theory was wrong, it left behind a strange kind of wisdom, that the mind and body are never strangers, and that peace within is still the truest form of health. The oracle in a jar, urine as the mirror of life. When a woman in the Middle Ages suspected she might be with child, she did not visit a clinic or take a test in private. She sent for the local physician, a man who moved through villages like a pilgrim of the body. He carried small vials, sheets of parchment, and an air of quiet certainty. When he entered the home, he spoke softly, almost reverently. He would look into the woman's eyes, study the color of her cheeks, the rhythm of her breathing. Then he would ask for the one thing he needed most, a small jar of her urine. To the medieval mind, urine was revelation. It was a sacred fluid, a reflection of the hidden world within. Its color told stories. Golden and bright meant health and joy. Pale meant weakness. Deep amber meant imbalance. Its clarity spoke of purity or sin, of calm or chaos inside the flesh. When held up to the light of a candle, it shimmered like liquid glass, and that shimmer was read as a sign that the womb was alive. If the glow dulled, the body was thought to be empty, the spirit quiet. Physicians kept wooden charts that displayed every shade the human body could produce. They compared tones from soft straw to dark honey and noted every scent and every ripple on the surface. To them, these details were not trivial. They were sacred codes. The body was believed to write its own autobiography in liquid light, one drop at a time. When the physician studied the jar, the room fell silent. He might tilt it gently, watching how the reflection of the candle swam across its surface. He might close his eyes and breathe deeply, letting the scent tell him what the stars already knew. For a moment, he became something between a scientist and a priest, interpreting a message from creation itself. There was no embarrassment in this ritual, there was awe. The people of that age did not separate the sacred from the physical. The body was holy, its fluids were divine script. The physician was its translator. Sometimes he would whisper that the liquid sang with life. Other times he would shake his head, warning that the balance of the humors had been disturbed. To the family gathered nearby, this was not medicine, it was prophecy. Each jar was an oracle, a small universe of color and motion. Every swirl of light upon the surface felt like an omen, every bubble a breath from the unseen. And in that soft flicker of candlelight, surrounded by the smell of wax and parchment, a truth began to take shape. Long before the world had science, it had wonder. And in their wonder, they found meaning, not through proof, but through attention. The jar, the candle, the silence. These were their instruments of faith. And in that quiet faith, the body spoke. The wheat and barley test, life in the seed. In a quiet corner of the medieval world, before hospitals, before glass flasks or laboratory scales, there was a ritual both humble and profound. The test of wheat and barley. It was not performed in halls of science, but in kitchens, in gardens, or beside windows where the morning sun fell gently across wooden tables. There were no instruments, no complex measurements, only 2 small handfuls of seed, a clay bowl, and a woman's quiet hope. When a woman wondered whether she carried life within her, she did not have certainty. There was no swift answer, only patience, ritual, and faith. The local physician or midwife might visit her home. Together they would gather 2 piles of grain, one of wheat, one of barley. They would spread them upon a flat surface, side by side, like twin offerings to the earth. The woman, often trembling with anticipation, would release her water over them. Then she would wait. For the next several days, those seeds became a silent companion to her thoughts. Every morning she would rise and check them, her hands hovering just above the small mounds of damp grain. She would study their color, their texture, their scent. If the barley sprouted first, it was said to be a sign of a boy. If the wheat pushed its tender shoots ahead, the omen spoke of a girl. But if nothing stirred, if the seeds remained cold and still, there would be no child, and it was simple, quiet, almost holy. The ritual did not require belief in medicine, only belief in nature, that the same life which stirred beneath the soil might echo the hidden life forming within her body. It was an act of symmetry, seed meeting seed, water meeting water, creation reflected in creation. The test belonged to the rhythm of the earth itself. As she waited, the days passed slowly, marked by the steady pulse of village life. Chickens scratching in the yard, smoke rising from hearths, the sound of church bells carried by the wind. The seeds rested by the window, catching the faint light of dawn and the chill of night. And she, in her waiting, entered a kind of meditation. She was part of something older than words, the mystery of beginnings. The physician might return after several days, his robe brushing against the floor as he leaned over the table. He would touch the grains lightly, feel their softness, and smile if he saw a small green thread breaking through the husk. The world was still full of uncertainty, yet in that moment the future seemed to reveal itself through a single, fragile stem. For those who practiced it, this was not superstition, it was communion. They believed that the body and the earth shared a sacred bond. Both could hold life, both could nurture it, both could give it back to the world. To see a seed awaken under the touch of a woman's essence was not just a sign, it was a poem written in soil and time. And though they did not have the language of science, they were not entirely wrong. Centuries later, researchers would discover something curious. Estrogen, the hormone produced by a pregnant woman's body, can indeed influence the germination of seeds, causing them to sprout more quickly. What the medieval healers observed through intuition and faith would eventually be confirmed by biology. Their method, clumsy and unmeasured, brushed against the edge of discovery. Yet in their world there were no microscopes to explain it, no charts or formulas to prove it. There was only wonder. The physician might describe it as the womb speaking to the earth, or the earth answering the womb. They did not speak of hormones. They spoke of mystery. They called it divine harmony, the whisper of God through nature. In monasteries and small villages alike, the ritual continued through generations. Sometimes it was done in secret, away from the eyes of priests who warned against idle curiosity. Sometimes it was done openly, a small comfort shared among women. Midwives, mothers and daughters passed it down quietly, not as doctrine, but as habit, a gentle tradition that carried both hope and reverence. Picture it now. A dimly lit room, perhaps in early spring. A single candle burns beside a clay bowl. The flame trembles and its light moves slowly across the wall. The woman kneels beside the window, eyes half closed, breath steady. The air smells faintly of earth and smoke. She leans closer, and for the first time she notices it. A tiny crack in the husk, a thread of green, no longer than a whisper. She smiles without speaking. In that moment, She feels connected to the great circle of life that hums quietly through everything that lives. This test, primitive as it seems, carried a certain tenderness. It asked nothing of gods or kings. It needed no permission from the church, no blessing from authority. It belonged to the people, to the rhythm of hands that worked the fields and the hearts that waited through the seasons. When modern readers encounter these customs, they often laugh at their strangeness. But perhaps laughter misses the point. The people of that age were not ignorant, they were searching. Their experiments were shaped not by arrogance, but by awe. They believed that truth could be found not only in books, but in the patient gaze of one who watches a seed sprout beneath sunlight. And so the test of wheat and barley became more than a method. It was a metaphor, a quiet conversation between the visible and the unseen, between the woman and her body, between the womb and the earth, between hope and time. Even now, centuries later, the image endures. A woman waiting in candlelight, a handful of damp seeds glistening faintly in the dark, and somewhere beneath the surface the first pulse of life. Silent, fragile, certain. In that stillness, one truth remains unchanged. Life awakens life, always. The wine test, alchemy in a cup. In the candle-lit chambers of the Middle Ages, there was another ritual, quieter than prayer, simpler than medicine, and somehow more beautiful than either. It was called the wine test. Wine, in that world, was no ordinary drink. It was sacred, ancient, alive. It was the blood of Christ in the chalice of Mass, the comfort of peasants at the end of a day, the mark of joy at weddings and harvests. To touch wine was to touch something both holy and human, a liquid that carried both spirit and story. And so when a woman believed she might carry life, she turned not to herbs or charms, but to the gentle truth hidden in a cup of wine. The ritual was simple. Her urine, the secret mirror of her body, was poured carefully into a goblet, often of pewter or glass if she could afford one. Then wine was added. The two liquids met with a faint swirl, a mingling of colour and scent that caught the candlelight like pale gold. If the mixture remained clear and bright, the physician declared the woman with child. If it turned cloudy or dull, the womb was thought to be empty. There were no tools, no measurements, no charts, only eyes and faith. The physician would raise the cup toward the nearest flame, tilting it back and forth with deliberate grace. The light passed through the glass, flickering across his face. He would swirl the liquid gently, studying the way it moved, how the light broke across the surface. To him, it was not a simple mixture, it was an oracle. The cup became a small universe, gold and red and shimmering with meaning. Some said that the purity of wine, blessed by God's own hand, could sense the purity of new life. That the wine, touched by the Holy Spirit, refused to grow cloudy in the presence of innocence. Others whispered that it was simply tradition, something done because it had always been done, because it made people feel less helpless before the mysteries of birth and fate. Still, the moment carried gravity. There was a reverence in the act. The way the doctor's hands steadied, the way the woman watched the cup in silence, her eyes reflecting both fear and hope. In that shared stillness, time seemed to hold its breath. The room smelled faintly of beeswax, metal, and fruit. Outside, a rooster might crow or a church bell might toll, but inside the walls, nothing moved except the trembling of light on liquid. Centuries later, science would explain what they could not. that alcohol reacts with certain proteins in urine, sometimes making it appear cloudy, sometimes not. A faint echo of accuracy, a fragile coincidence mistaken for revelation. But even knowing that, one cannot help but feel a kind of respect for their effort, for their attempt to read the language of the body using the only tools they had: patience, faith, and wonder. To them, this was not science, it was ceremony. A blending of the sacred and the bodily, a union of heaven and earth within a single cup. Perhaps that is why the act lingered so long through time, because it offered more than knowledge, it offered ritual, it gave meaning to uncertainty, form to fear, and rhythm to the waiting. Picture it now, a dark room, a single flame, a quiet woman, a physician lost in contemplation. The liquid stirs, the light flickers, and for a fleeting moment, the ancient world believes it has glimpsed the secret of creation, not through proof, but through reverence. In that stillness, chemistry becomes prayer, and faith, for a moment, becomes enough. The onion and garlic test, the tunnel of the womb. Across the long and winding road of ancient history, few ideas travelled as far or lasted as long as the strange little test that joined women and onions. From the sunlit lands of Egypt to the marble courtyards of Greece and onward to the candlelit cottages of medieval Europe, the same ritual was whispered, practiced, and passed down: the onion and garlic test. It was simple, humble, almost absurd by modern eyes. But to the people of those centuries, it was a window into mystery. A woman who wondered whether she carried a child would take a peeled onion, or sometimes a clove of garlic, and place it gently inside her body before sleep. It was not done in haste or shame. It was a solemn act, a private ritual beneath the watch of the moon. The onion, to them, was no ordinary plant. It was sacred, layered, alive. Garlic, too, was considered powerful, a protector against evil, a purifier of air, a plant that carried both healing and warning. As night deepened, the room would fall into stillness. The woman lay quiet beneath rough linen sheets, listening to the wind outside and the small sounds of life within her home, the crackle of embers, the breath of her husband, the soft shifting of straw beneath the bed. Somewhere in that silence, she might have wondered if the life inside her was also listening, also waiting. By dawn, when the first light slipped through the wooden shutters, the ritual turned to revelation. Her breath would be tested. If her breath carried the scent of onion or garlic, the verdict was clear. Her womb was open. No child was there. But if her breath remained sweet and still, untouched by the pungent fragrance, it was a sign of pregnancy. The womb, they said, had closed to protect its secret. This test, simple as it seemed, was born from a larger belief that the womb was not merely an organ, but a creature, a living, breathing being inside the body. It could move, it could travel, it could rise and fall depending on mood, season, or desire. It could wander toward the heart and cause suffocation, or sink too low and bring sorrow. And through it, they imagined, a tunnel of air connected the mouth to the mystery below. In this imagined anatomy, breath and fertility were one. If the scent of onion could travel upward, the passage was open. If not, something or someone was there, closing it off. To the modern mind, it sounds like myth, and perhaps it was. But to those who lived in that age of slow discovery, it was faith disguised as physiology, the anatomy of imagination. For centuries, physicians and midwives wrote of the wandering womb. They described it as a restless being that sought warmth and fragrance. When women felt faint or sad, they said the womb had floated upward, and pressed upon the lungs. The cure was to lure it back down with pleasant scents near the hips and unpleasant ones near the nose, perfumes below, smoke above. They believed the womb could be guided like an animal, soothed, coaxed, disciplined. And so the onion and garlic test fit perfectly into their understanding of the body. It was both diagnosis and dialogue, a conversation between the visible and the unseen. They believed that everything living spoke a language, and if one listened closely enough, even the womb would answer. Picture a small stone house in medieval Europe. The walls are rough, the air cool. A woman sits near a fire, her face lit by the glow of embers. In her lap rests a cloth bundle, the onion she will use later that night. Outside, the village sleeps beneath the rhythm of the wind. Inside, faith and fear mingle quietly, as old as time. To her, this act is not superstition. It is hope. A way to find meaning in the uncertainty of life and death that ruled her world. To test is to care, to wonder, to seek connection with something greater, the invisible pattern that binds soil, flesh, and spirit. By morning, when her breath is checked, the result is less important than the ritual itself. Whether she smells of onion or not, the act has already done its quiet work. It has reminded her that she belongs to a long chain of women who have looked inward for answers when the world offered none. The physician who performs the test might write down his observation in a leather-bound ledger. The breath carried no scent, he would note, therefore the womb is sealed and life begins within. He does not question how or why, he simply records, for to question is to trespass on divine mystery. There was poetry in their misunderstanding. They saw connection where we now see separation, spirit where we see systems. Their world was made not of organs and cells, but of symbols. The womb was not flesh, it was destiny.
The onion was not a vegetable, it was truth wrapped in layers.
And though time would later peel away their errors, something of their reverence still lingers. They lived with the body as one lives with the seasons, not to control it, but to coexist with it, to read its moods, to honor its silence. In the long hush of that world, the onion test was more than curiosity. It was a kind of prayer. A prayer whispered in the language of scent and breath, between waking and sleep, between the outer world and the inner one. We might smile at it now, but perhaps there is a quiet beauty in how they saw themselves, as small reflections of a vast, breathing universe. For them, the womb was the tunnel of life, the bridge between what is known and what is waiting to be born. And through that tunnel, for one still night, the scent of an onion carried the weight of the human soul. Searching, believing, alive. The wandering womb, medicine as metaphor. In the long twilight of the Middle Ages, medicine was not anatomy, it was poetry. The body was not seen as a system of organs, but as a landscape alive with spirits and moods. And among all those hidden presences, one was believed to be the most restless, the most mysterious, the most alive, the womb. They said it could move, that it drifted within a woman's body like a small, sentient creature. When the woman was calm, the womb rested low, near the belly, content and still. But when she was sad or frightened or lonely, it rose toward the heart, pressing against the lungs, stealing her breath and voice. It was a faithful companion and a dangerous wanderer, a spirit that needed to be soothed. Physicians described it in tones of awe and fear. They said the womb could travel upward through the chest, or sideways into the ribs, or even as far as the throat. When it moved, it carried sorrow with it. A woman fainting from grief was not overwhelmed by emotion, they believed. She was suffocating under the weight of her wandering womb, and so they treated it not with logic, but with fragrance. If the womb had risen too high, foul smells were placed near the woman's nose: burnt hair, bitter herbs, the smoke of vinegar or resin, to drive it back down. Near her hips they placed sweet perfumes, lavender, honey, and rosewater, coaxing the creature homeward with comfort and care. It was a dance of scent and faith, a ritual of invisible persuasion. The doctor, kneeling beside her, would wave the herbs like a priest swinging incense, whispering small prayers as though addressing the womb directly. "Come back to your home," he might murmur, "come back to rest." To us, this may sound like superstition, but in that world it was tenderness, an act of care expressed through imagination. They did not have knowledge, so they built meaning instead. And perhaps, in their way, they were right about something deeper. For sadness does rise, it does press against the chest and steal breath. The body, when burdened by sorrow, feels heavy and misplaced. Their language was wrong, but their intuition was not. The womb was only their symbol for the soul. When the sweet scents failed, prayers followed. Women were bathed in warm oils, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by candlelight. Priests came to bless the room, and the air filled with murmurs of faith. Healing was not only physical, it was spiritual. The line between medicine and mercy had not yet been drawn. They lived in a world where fragrance could cure despair, where herbs carried memory, and where sorrow could be lifted through scent. The air itself became medicine, and the breath a kind of confession. There was a quiet beauty in this way of thinking. It meant that healing was not a battle, but a reunion, an attempt to bring the body back to itself. And though the methods were flawed, the intention was pure: to bring peace to the restless, to coax harmony back into the dissonant music of flesh and spirit. A medieval physician's room was a gentle chaos of color and smell, shelves lined with jars of dried lavender, sage, myrrh, and rose petals. Bundles of mint hung from wooden beams. The air trembled with the mix of sweetness and smoke. In the corner, a woman sat by the window, her hands folded, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The doctor stood nearby, his voice a low rhythm that mingled with the whisper of wind outside.
"Breathe deeply," he might say. "Let the good air fill you."
And she did. And maybe, just maybe, it helped.
Not because of the herbs or the theory, but because someone stayed beside her. Because someone believed she could be healed. We can smile at their mistakes, but their world reminds us that medicine was once an art of attention, a way of looking closely, listening deeply, and never separating the body from the heart. They used stories where we now use science, but both grew from the same human need: to ease pain, to restore balance, to believe that peace can return.
When they said the womb wandered, what they truly meant was that sorrow wandered, that the soul, too, could lose its home inside the body. And when they tried to lure it back with the perfume of flowers and prayer, what they were really doing was calling the woman herself back to calm, to breath, to stillness. In the end, it was not medicine, it was metaphor, but in a world without certainty, metaphor was enough. So when the air in their small cottages filled with the scent of rosemary and smoke, and when a woman's breath slowed after a long night of tears, they said the womb had returned. And perhaps it had, just not in the way they imagined. It was a world that believed fragrance could cure sorrow. And maybe, in its quiet way, it sometimes did. The Midwives, the Real Healers. In the shadow of the grand cathedrals and stone universities of medieval Europe, there were women who practiced a quieter kind of wisdom, the midwives. While physicians in their dark robes argued over theories, grinding herbs and studying jars of urine, the midwives worked in silence. They were not scholars, nor did they seek the approval of priests or kings. Their knowledge was older than any book, passed through generations, carried in memory, in touch, in instinct. They were women of patience, women of rhythm. They did not chase knowledge, they listened to it. They read the human body as one reads the sky, slowly, gently, without hurry. They could tell when a woman carried life not by signs or symbols, but by presence. They watched how she moved, how her breath deepened when she rose from bed, how her eyes softened when she gazed at the horizon. They felt the pulse beneath her wrist, not to measure, but to understand. The body spoke to them in ways that no physician could translate. The midwives knew the scent of birth, the sound of it, the silence before it began. They knew the trembling of fear, the whisper of hope. They had stood beside thousands of women in summer heat, in winter storms, in rooms lit by candles and faith. And each time they carried the same quiet promise: you are not alone. They walked through snow and rain to reach their patients, through forests and narrow alleys, guided only by the faint light of their lanterns. Their baskets carried cloths, herbs, and courage. Inside were simple tools: a length of thread, a wooden spoon, a flask of oil. But the greatest tool they carried was calm. When a woman's cries filled the night, it was the midwife who steadied her voice. When panic rose like a wave, it was the midwife who spoke softly, slowly, until the air grew gentle again. They understood the sacred rhythm of pain, that pain was not punishment, but passage. No charts, no Latin incantations, just breath, touch, and patience. They knew the pulse of life by feel. They could tell when the child was near by the shift in the mother's eyes. They knew when to wait, when to act, when to whisper prayers to the Virgin, when to ask for silence. Their work was dangerous, often thankless. When the birth went well, credit was given to God. When it went badly, blame was given to them. Many were accused of witchcraft, their skill mistaken for sorcery. The same hands that had brought life into the world could be chained, condemned, or burned. Yet they continued. They could not stop because birth itself could not stop. Each child that entered the world through their care was another act of quiet defiance, proof that compassion could exist even in fear's shadow. Their rooms smelled of lavender and smoke, of blood and milk, of life and loss. They worked in the half-light of dawn, their eyes lined with fatigue, but never complaint. When the newborn's first cry came, the midwife's face softened, and for a moment the world seemed whole again. They did not speak of spirits or theories. They simply understood what they saw. Their wisdom was born from repetition, not revelation, from living the same miracle countless times until it became part of their breath. A midwife's art was not written down. It was remembered by hand, by heart. A mother taught her daughter. A daughter taught her friend. And, through them, the chain of knowledge endured, long before men gave it a name. Historians would later call it the first quiet science. A science without books, without laboratories, without fame. But it was science nonetheless. Observation, experiment, care, and the relentless search for understanding. In a world ruled by fear and superstition, they practiced presence. While others prayed for miracles, they became the miracle. Picture it now, a small cottage, snow pressing against the window, a single candle burning beside the bed, a woman in labor, her hand clutching the midwife's.
The midwife's voice, steady and low.
Outside, the wind howls. Inside, new life stirs. There are no trumpets, no priests, no physicians. Only two women and the oldest rhythm of all. The rhythm of birth. The rhythm of being.
And when the child finally comes, slick and wailing, the midwife wraps it in linen and holds it to the mother's chest.
Her work is done. She gathers her tools, her herbs, her silence, and disappears back into the night. A candle against the darkness. A guardian of beginnings. Their names were rarely written, their faces never carved in stone, but without them, history itself would not have been born. The women who knew too much. In the slow and trembling centuries of the Middle Ages, the boundary between faith and fear was paper thin. What was not understood was often condemned. What was not written in Latin was dismissed as superstition. And what was practiced by women, quietly, faithfully, in shadow and in secrecy, was too often called witchcraft. The church grew wary of the midwives. Their skill, though gentle and life-giving, carried a kind of power that frightened men who preached from pulpits. Men of theology believed that wisdom must come from books and scripture, not from the hands of common women. They studied the mysteries of heaven but did not trust the mysteries of the womb, so they gave it a name that would justify their fear: sorcery. But the midwives knew nothing of spells. They had no incantations, no secret oaths. Their magic was knowledge, patient, practical, born from centuries of observation. They understood what made the body strong, what herbs could calm pain, what positions eased labor, what words softened fear. They did not claim divine power. They did not summon spirits. They simply stayed beside the suffering when others turned away. Still, their quiet competence was dangerous in a world built on control. A woman who could ease pain without a priest's blessing or a physician's decree was a threat. A woman who could bring forth life without permission from the church was something to be feared. And so rumors began to grow. They whispered that the midwives made pacts with the moon, that they prayed not to God but to the old earth itself, that their herbs were poisons and their touch a curse. The same hands that had delivered thousands of infants were suddenly accused of consorting with darkness. In sermons, priests warned of women who stole the cries of newborns. In markets, neighbors lowered their voices when a midwife passed. The same people who once called for her in desperation now crossed themselves at her shadow. And yet, the midwives continued. They stayed near the fires of birth, hands steady, voices low. They did not shout their innocence. They simply carried on. For every church bell that tolled against them, there was a mother's cry that called them back. And they answered. They walked through night fog and snow, through alleys and fields, carrying baskets of linen and herbs. When they entered a home, fear seemed to lift. They brought a presence that was calm, almost sacred, a silence filled with purpose. The fire crackled, the air smelled of oil and smoke, and time slowed until only the rhythm of breath and heartbeat remained. They were accused, condemned, and sometimes punished. Some disappeared into prisons, some into flames, their names erased by the same ink that once wrote prayers. But many endured. They could not vanish because life could not. For as long as there were births, someone would need their hands. A cry in the night. A mother in pain. A child entering the world. And so they returned again and again. Not because they were fearless, but because they were needed. They were not saints nor scholars. They sought no praise. Their power was not ambition, it was service. They were guardians of the oldest mystery, the passage of life into life. In those years when the Church declared childbirth a punishment for Eve's sin, it was the midwife who turned that punishment into grace. She did not preach, she soothed. She did not judge, she comforted. In her presence, pain was not divine wrath, but divine rhythm, the labor of creation itself. The physician spoke of humors and balance, the priest spoke of sin and salvation. But the midwife spoke only of endurance, and endurance, in the end, was what kept the world alive. There is something profoundly human in their silence, a humility that modern science has almost forgotten. They knew that birth could not be controlled or predicted, it could only be witnessed. The body had its own wisdom, and their task was to honor it. Their art was not about conquest, it was about belonging to earth, to breath, to the fragile continuity of existence. Every time they held a newborn, they touched eternity in miniature. Every time they buried an infant lost to fever, they bowed to the limits of their power. Their faith was not written in scripture but in experience, that life was sacred not because it was easy, but because it was fragile. The Church, with its robes and incense, claimed to speak for God. The midwives, with their quiet hands, spoke for creation itself. And though the centuries turned against them, they left behind something indestructible, the memory of care without recognition, the art of tending to life without pride or permission. Imagine them now, a flicker of firelight on tired faces, a woman in labor whispering prayers between contractions, a midwife's steady hand on her shoulder, her calm voice cutting through the panic. The air thick with smoke, sweat, and faith. Outside, the snow falling softly, muffling the world. Inside, the faint cry of a new soul breaking the silence. No one writes their names. No one builds their monuments, but history moves through their hands.
And even as they were called witches and outcasts, they were doing something sacred, something that transcended fear and doctrine. They were keeping the flame of life alive.
They lived in a world that misunderstood them, a world that punished knowledge when it came without permission. Yet, across centuries, their legacy survived. Not in books, but in every act of care that followed, in every nurse's touch, in every mother's calm, in every whisper that says, "Breathe, you are safe, you are not alone." Because the truth is simple, they were never witches. They were healers, and though the world feared them, the world could not live without them. They were, and always will be, the quiet guardians of birth. The women who knew too much and cared even more. Epilogue: the quiet persistence of life. Centuries passed and the world changed. The old beliefs faded like smoke drifting from a long extinguished fire. The jars, the candles, the herbs, the whispered prayers, all grew quiet, leaving behind only traces, faint as scent on the air. Science rose, patient and unhurried, building truth layer upon truth. Theories gave way to facts. Microscopes opened new worlds hidden within drops of blood and tears. The body, once a field of mysteries, became a map of cells, organs, and chemistry. Yet beneath all that progress, something of the old world remained. Its spirit lingered, the soft persistence of wonder. For every formula discovered, there still lived the question that began it all. Why does life choose to bloom? The old rituals may seem naive to modern eyes. Jars of urine placed near windows, seeds soaked in secret hope, onions tested by breath, prayers whispered into silence. But they were not foolish. They were the first fragile bridges between ignorance and knowledge. Each one carried the same quiet impulse, the human desire to understand what it means to live. The physicians with their bowls and vials, the midwives with their herbs and patience, all of them were reaching through darkness toward the same light. They sought connection, meaning, and peace within the unknown. They did not possess truth, but they listened for it. And listening, in its own way, was a kind of wisdom. When the Enlightenment arrived, it did not erase them. It inherited them. The scientist's curiosity was born from the healer's devotion. The sterile lab was once the smoky cottage. The microscope's lens replaced the candle flame, but the gesture was the same, to hold something small and sacred up to the light and ask, "What are you?" Those who came before us lived in a world without certainty. They did not measure time by progress, but by patience. To observe, to listen, to wait. The midwives, long forgotten in dusty records, had been right in their simplicity. They knew what no doctrine could teach, that the body, left in peace, holds its own rhythm, that birth, healing, and sorrow all move by laws deeper than any written word. They trusted what they could see and feel, the warmth of skin, the tremor of a pulse, the cry of a newborn. Their knowledge was not abstract, it was alive. Today we name their craft science. But they would not have recognized the word, they called it care. Imagine now as you rest that the centuries are folding quietly behind you. The noise of engines, the glare of screens, the hum of cities, all dissolving into distance. You are standing once more at the edge of a medieval village. The night is calm. Snow drifts through the air, each flake turning in the dim light of a single candle. Ahead, a small cottage waits. Its roof sags, its walls are dark with age, but smoke curls softly from the chimney. Inside, a faint orange glow flickers. You step closer and open the door. The scent greets you first. Herbs, wood smoke, and something faintly sweet, like honey steeped in heat. The air is warm, slow and full of breath. A fire burns low in the hearth, its light trembling over the wooden floor. A woman sits nearby, a blanket over her shoulders, her eyes heavy with fatigue and peace. Beside her, the midwife moves, quiet, steady, unhurried. Her hands, lined with age, are careful and sure. She stirs a small pot, checks the flame, wipes her palms and smiles. There is no fear here, no rush, no noise, no command. Only the rhythm of life as it has always been. Inhale, exhale, wait. In that moment, all the centuries collapse into stillness. The world outside, with its machines and theories, seems far away. A dream that has not yet been dreamed. Here, the laws of life are simple again. Observe, listen, wait. The midwife moves toward the bed and adjusts the cloth on the mother's brow. The child beside her stirs, sighs, and sleeps again. The fire crackles softly, its smoke curling upward, like a prayer that does not need words. This is what they understood, those quiet healers. That life does not need to be controlled to be sacred. It only needs space, warmth, time. Centuries later, when laboratories hum and data glows on screens, that truth remains. The instruments are different, the heart is not. Every scientist peering into a microscope is repeating the same act, holding something fragile up to the light, hoping to glimpse the secret of its motion. Every doctor who pauses beside a patient's bed, every nurse who waits through a long night, continues the same lineage of care that began in cottages like this one.
The old world is gone, but its rhythm remains, the rhythm of breath, the rhythm of being alive.
And so, as you rest now, let that rhythm return to you. Let the centuries grow distant. Let the air around you soften, the edges blur. You are in that cottage again, safe, warm, surrounded by the quiet hum of existence. The fire glows softly. The scent of herbs drifts through the air. Somewhere nearby, a child dreams. There is no fear here, no judgment, no need for explanation, only the slow, patient pulse of life, eternal and unchanged. This is what endures, not the rituals or the errors, but the reaching, the persistence of curiosity, the tenderness that refuses to fade. For all our progress, for all our machines and wisdom, we are still doing what they once did in candlelight, searching for meaning in the smallest signs, tracing the outlines of mystery with trembling hands. The old tests, the seeds, the jars, the wine, the onion, the smoke, they were not mistakes. They were beginnings, beginnings of a journey that has never truly ended. Because life itself, no matter how deeply we study it, remains a kind of quiet miracle, patient, hidden, and endlessly reborn. So, breathe now. Let your thoughts drift like smoke through the rafters of that old cottage. The fire dims, but its warmth lingers. The night holds you gently, like the midwife's steady hands once held a newborn. There is no need to seek.
No need to know.
Only to rest in the same silence that has always surrounded creation. The world outside fades into dream, and in that dream the rhythm continues, soft, patient, and still.